Most of us tend to take printed materials for granted, but imagine life today if the printing press had never been invented. We would not have books, magazines, or newspapers. Posters, flyers, pamphlets, and mail would not exist. The printing press allows us to share large amounts of information quickly and in huge numbers. In fact, the printing press is so significant that it has come to be known as one of the most important inventions of our time. Before the printing press was invented, any writings and drawings had to be completed painstakingly by hand. Several different materials were used to transcribe books: clay and papyrus, wax and parchment. It wasn't just anyone who was allowed to do this. Such work was usually reserved for scribes who lived and worked in monasteries. The monasteries had a special room called a scriptorium. There, the scribe would work in silence, first measuring and outlining the page layouts and then carefully copying the text from one book to another. Later, the illuminator would take over to add designs and embellishments to the pages. In the Dark Ages, books were usually only owned by monasteries, educational institutions, and extremely rich people. The original method of mass printing was block printing, pressing sheets of paper into individually carved wooden blocks. It is believed that block printing originated in China. There is evidence that it existed as early as the 5th century BC. The Chinese had been carving wood blocks to print short texts that were carried as charms. This form of printing used a carved material covered in ink to transfer an image onto paper or fabric. It was done by transferring ink onto wood or clay, and then onto the paper. Over extended use, these blocks became blurred. Because of the difficulty in carving massive quantities of text to every page or block, printing books was an incredibly time-consuming activity. Around the late 1430s, a German goldsmith named Johann Gutenberg was quite desperate to find a way to make money. He became interested in how lucrative it was to create mass amounts of cheap product. During the 13s to 1400s, people had developed a very basic form of printing. It involved letters or images cut on blocks of wood. The block would be dipped in ink and then stamped onto paper. Gutenberg already had previous experience in working in a mint, and he realized that if he could use cut blocks within a machine, he could make the printing process a lot faster. Even better, he would be able to reproduce text in great numbers. Gutenberg refined printing with the first widespread use of movable type, where the characters are separate parts that are inserted to make text. He made metal molds by the use of dies, into which he could pour hot liquid metal, thereby producing separate letters as the same shape as those written by hand. These letters were similar, more readable, and more durable than wooden blocks. Such letters could be arranged and rearranged many times as the printer wished to create different pages from the same letters. It became known as a movable type machine, since the metal block letters could be moved around to create new words and sentences. Gutenberg also introduced the use of a printing press to press type against paper. For this, he used a hand press used in his time by the wine industry. Ink was rolled over the raised surfaces of the hand-set letters within a wooden frame, and the frame was then pressed against the paper. After a page was printed, the type could be reused for printing other pages. With this machine, Gutenberg made the very first printed book, which was naturally a reproduction of the Bible. Today, the Gutenberg Bible is an incredibly valuable, treasured item for its historical legacy. Gutenberg's invention made a dramatic impact when it reached the public. At first, noble classes looked down on it. To them, hand-inked books were a sign of luxury and grandeur, and it was no match for the cheaper, mass-produced books. The press-printed materials were at first more popular with the lower classes. Printed text became a new way to spread information to vast audiences quickly and cheaply. Academics benefited from this sharing of scholarly ideas, and even politicians found that they could garner the public's interest through printed pamphlets. An important side effect was that people learned to read and increase their knowledge more easily now. whereas in the past it was common for people to be quite uneducated. Literacy levels, still low among the general population in Europe, rose as the cost of books steadily dropped, and book fairs became yearly occurrences in most major cities during the early years of the Renaissance. The printing press was one of the key factors in the explosion of the Renaissance movement. Access to standard works of science, especially, stimulated and spread new ideas quicker than ever. This increased the discussion and the development of new ideas. Another significant effect was that the printing press was largely responsible for the decline of the language of Latin. Other regional languages or vernacular became the norm in locally printed materials. The impact this mechanical printing press made would forever influence the way we produce and spread books. The printing press allowed a greater population to have access to more books for a much cheaper price. By 1500, the printing presses throughout Western Europe had produced more than 20 million copies. The printing press surely played a major role in shaping the Renaissance.